Family violence is many things. People really have an assumption that family violence is only physical violence, or that it's violence that leaves physical marks and evidence. But family violence can take many different forms. It can be psychological, emotional violence, it can be financial violence, or sexual violence. And those forms of violence aren't always evident or obvious unless you're asking the right questions or building that trust to hear about it. Family violence often impacts children, and children bear witness to that violence, which in itself is a form of maltreatment. And family violence cuts across all sectors of society. I think people also have assumptions that family violence only happens in certain relationships or with certain cultures. That's absolutely not true. That really at the heart of it, violence is about control over another person and somebody exerting that control and power over another person, and that can happen in any family.
You don't have to be an expert on family violence. The important thing is that you are alert to the signs and symptoms, and if you see them, not to shy away, so that you're asking about intimate partner violence or IPV, that you're following documentation guidelines, that you have safety protocols in place for your client, maybe even for yourself for the practice. And that you also have client safety plans in place, a toolkit that you can share with them.
Trauma-informed care is something that midwives are sort of perfectly positioned to do because of our model of care being so based in relationship with our clients. And I think one of the really important things to realize about trauma is how pervasive it is. That it's probably less the exception and more the universal experience that everybody's experienced trauma, obviously to different degrees. Our goal in providing trauma-informed care is that we're not re-traumatizing our clients and that we really center their needs in all of our interactions. So if a client has a strong reaction to something, it's really important to, instead of think, what's wrong with you, to reframe the way we approach our care and think, what's happened to this person in their life that might be eliciting that response, and what's happening inside that client's experience and inside that client's emotional landscape that leads to responses that are triggered by trauma. So trauma-informed care is really about trying to create as safe an environment as possible for clients to trust their care provider, for clients to feel like they can open up about their experiences if they feel safe to do so, and to really start from the position of assuming that all of our clients have experienced trauma in their lives.
I am a non-Indigenous midwife. I'm a fifth-generation white settler in Canada, and for me, I spend a lot of my time working toward reconciliation as within the Midwives Association, and for me, supporting reconciliation and supporting the lived experience of Indigenous midwives and clients, it's important to listen and listen to listen and amplify the voices of Indigenous people in Canada, and let them lead the way on how they want their care to look and how they want midwifery to look for them, and use your white privilege to support that. So how that could look is encouraging policy changes, actively supporting Indigenous midwives in your community to stay in practice and have supportive practices, and just continue to be humble and learn, continue to ask questions to center the voices of Indigenous people.
Practicing trauma-informed care and understanding and learning about cultural safety, having an understanding of the tools of colonialism, white supremacy, anti-Indigenous racism, like learning about how to conduct yourself in those ways, even having an understanding of the land that you live on, the treaties that were signed for that land, the people that were part of those treaties, having some sort of outreach to Indigenous people in that area, like looking at your clientele. If you don't have a lot of self-identifying Indigenous people, asking yourself why and how you can change the way you intake people to include them. We're everywhere. And if we're not in your office, there's probably a reason. And it may not be a good one. So invite elders, community members to help you encourage people to come and access midwifery care would be the beginning of that. Asking people open-ended questions without digging into their safety networks. You will see red flags and suspect things probably long before sometimes those people even know they're in an abusive relationship. Some people don't even understand that because that kind of control and power over them maybe is something they have known all their life. And some people really aren't ready to leave because there's too many things at stake. Maybe housing, maybe children, community. You have to be very careful about how you talk to people and let them initiate the conversation. By practicing trauma-informed care, we can encourage people and earn their trust, and that opens doors to letting them identify or understand the kind of situation that they're in, and then ask you for help. And when they do ask, be prepared by knowing the community services. That's the main thing that you need to do in terms of getting your homework done, is realize what services are in your area and how those clients can access it.
It can be tricky to know whether or not to report a situation. The fact is that it's actually complicated and not black and white. When deciding whether or not to report, it's important to acknowledge for oneself and also for one's client that if there is a suspicion of child maltreatment, then midwives have a duty to report. That being said, we also need to recognize the potential harm that can come out of child protection. And so I think it's important to work with a client to explore the difference so that you're clear, the both of you, on the difference between disclosure and reporting, the potential impacts, and that you're working with the client through that to navigate that situation. So out of respect for them and also out of your professional obligations.
Practicing self-care as a midwife is it's such a common conversation these days because midwives are facing increasing levels of burnout and moral injury, and I don't believe that self-care is enough to sustain any midwife's practice. I believe that it's super important that we know what our resources are in our own communities for taking care of ourselves and focusing on our own health. So having essentially like a toolkit in our back pocket for when we face situations that are challenging in our clinical work. So having a therapeutic relationship with a counselor or psychologist before you need that person, ensuring that we have adequate disability and health benefits, so ensuring that we're adequately covered if we do face burnout or face injury in our work based on dealing with really, really difficult cases. I think that's very important, and drawing on the resources and knowledge of people around you. So there's a lot of midwives in Canada, and understanding what other people have gone through to develop a supportive practice, because we do face clinical cases that can sometimes be really challenging and really difficult, family violence being one of those. So having those additional supports and taking care of one another is really, really important in midwifery work.